All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 145 of the On Air Advocate. We're at the On Air Advocate. We look to provide education, support, and empowerment for all of those with different abilities, mental and medical illnesses, and their caregivers. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Tammy Flynn, and I am the host and producer of the On Air Advocate. And I am super excited if you are joining us here for our wrap-up series, or whether you are catching this on the replay. Well, as always, if you think that any of this information could be valuable to the people in your network or in your circle, please hit the share button and share the love with others. If you guys have been watching all month long, I'm sure you know that we are entrenched in this back to school transition series and everything around that. And today is our wrap up of our whole entire series. And I couldn't think of anybody better to wrap this up than one of our former guests. She's attorney Vicki Davis Dávila, and she is an expert for guardianship, walking into IEPs, all of that. And I know that with heading back to school, that's such a big thing. A lot of our kiddos have IEPs right when the school year starts, and we're going to be tackling today what are the items to prepare, some of those top items when heading into it. So first, though, I want to welcome you, Vicki. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I am glad to have you. And since Vicki was here last, she had another baby.
Thank you.
So congratulations on being a mama again. And I am just so excited to kind of hear your point of view, because I know that there is so much information out there, kind of parents preparing, things you should read through, things you should do, forms you should fill out that you can find online, but really looking at it from that legal aspect, because I wanted you to share a little bit more too. I know you go into IEPs sometimes with families, right?
Oh, yes, I do. Absolutely.
So I don't know if you can share a little bit about that, kind of who you all serve, to begin with within your legal practice, but then how does that bridge, when people are coming in asking questions about IEPs and you being involved in that process?
Sure, absolutely. So my practice focuses on disability loss. And that's across the lifespan. And so IEPs are a big part of our practice. A lot of times by the time a parent has called us and wants me or my partner to attend an IEP meeting with them, things have really de-escalated to a point where usually there's pretty bad communication breakdown. The IEP meetings have gotten, hostile. It's not a room that anybody wants to be in. And a lot of the issues that we get called in for are around related services. So canceling or decreasing services like speech or other therapies. And then another big issue is placement. Where is the child physically going to be, and what type of classroom? So sometimes the parents have a difference of opinion with the school about whether the child should be in a more or less integrated setting. Those are kind of the big issues that we see, and they kind of all fall under those umbrellas. And if we're involved, the school has to have their attorney there as well. So.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
So because when you think about it, obviously I've sat in a ton of IEPs, over, my son's 2 decades. And I know that, if you're obviously not getting your answers, there's liaisons and corporations and, I'm saying organizations you can call to have like an advocate support there. But when they're calling you, this has gone to a whole new level.
Sure. And sometimes we're even called in after the IEP meeting and we're going to a mediation or a facilitated IEP because they've kind of gone to the next level of dispute resolution.
Okay.
But you're right. There's so many different organizations. You can bring in an advocate, and a lot of parents don't necessarily know you can bring anybody you want with you into an IEP meeting. It's just good to give a heads up so it can be on the invitation. So anybody with special information about your child, or even somebody who's just there to give you moral support to get through the meeting, they can come. Bring your mom. It's totally fine.
Right. Because it can be a very, for an individual educational plan, these are what the IEP meetings are, in case people don't know what the IEP stands for, is that it can be very intimidating sometimes, especially if you're a first timer and you're walking in and you have all these school people, and then it's you. So it is sometimes
Absolutely.
nice to bring that support system along with you, whether that's that. So from your perspective, what would you say are some of the most important things that families should be bringing with them to that IEP?
Sure. So I kind of narrowed it. I made a list of 5 things. There are a ton of important things about IEPs, but especially I kind of try to think of it in terms of coming back from summer. So all kids, regardless of whether they are labeled with having a disability or not, kids lose skills over the summer, especially if they aren't like actively involved in trying to keep their skills up to snuff. So a lot of kids are losing 2 to 3 months of their reading and math skills over the summer. So a lot of schools are spending about the same amount of time reteaching things that were focused on the year before. So my first bullet point was parent concerns. When you are heading into an IEP meeting, it's so important to, ahead of time, write down the things that you are seeing with your child. And that doesn't necessarily just have to mean concerns or problems, but it could be, especially thinking about summer, like this is what we worked on over the summer in therapy or with their, on social skills, on academics, whatever it might be. This is what happened medically. We were in the hospital for 4 weeks this summer, whatever it might be. Prepare kind of a summary of what happened. And I know not everybody has an IEP coming up in September, October, right in the beginning of the year, but still, I think it's important to get those concerns written down. It's also trying to get your questions ahead of time, because when you're in that meeting and it's all these school people and just you, if you don't prepare your notes, it's really easy to forget. And then you walk out of that meeting and you're like, oh no, I didn't ask about this, that, or the other thing. And, try to kind of keep tabs on your child's skills. So a lot of kids, some kids qualify for extended school year services through their IEP. So they are getting some kind of direct interaction with the school over the summer, whether it's continuing like a therapy service or actually working on academics. But a lot of kids don't qualify for that. That's kind of a tough threshold to get that in your IEP. So really try to connect with your kids' teachers, and that does not have to be through the IEP meeting. That can just be one-on-one about what's been going on over the summer.
Right. Because, if they've lost skill, which they do over the summertime, and your goals are set at this, a lot of times that needs some adjustment.
Sure, absolutely. Well, the present levels is the most important part of the IEP. Like, what is this child doing right now? And where that is might not be the same as when they left school, especially when these benchmarks on our IEP goals are so fine-tuned that, a lot of times it's like, for example, Johnny will initiate a conversation with another child in, 6 out of 8 opportunities or something like that. Well, 5 out of 8 and 6 out of 8, that's a big jump. Even if they've lost 1 place on their benchmark, it's a big percentage place, and the present levels need to accurately reflect how they're doing right now.
Right. Very good. I'm just jotting these down too as you're saying it. Everyone that's watching should be following along. Or if you're watching and you're able to stick it right inside of the comments, that's great. All right, and so your number 2.
So my number 2 is, and this is not necessarily an easy task, but I think it's important to find out what the curriculum is. And that's, probably a little bit of a lofty goal, but talk to your child's teachers, especially, when they're older, they might have multiple teachers for different subjects. What do you expect them to know or do by the end of the school year and at different points throughout the school year? So for all children, again, regardless of IEP or not, there are things that the school is going to be looking for them to do. So for example, for like a first grader, they might expect them to have 50 sight words in the beginning of the year and 150 by the end of the year.
Right.
Just things like that they're using to measure. It's really important for families to be engaged in general so they can keep track of what's going on at home. One thing that we see a lot with, when we get involved in IEPs is that you've gotten to the end of an IEP, you're at an annual, a year has gone by, and there's not progress on, whatever it might be, and what could we have done at various points along the year to address that versus, oh no, now we're keeping the same goal because the child didn't make enough progress. So the reason I think it's important to know what the whole class is expected to work on is so you can really connect that back to the goals. So it's really important to understand your child's goals and the benchmarks. It's also important to ask questions about why those goals are the ones being chosen. And, kids in special ed have a right to, access the general curriculum to the maximum extent they can. So a lot of times I'll talk to parents about goals, that'll be one of my questions, and they'll say, well, I don't know what they are. You have to understand them, and if you don't understand them, find somebody you can trust at school to explain it, because they're pretty technical sometimes, or that's a great time to bring like an advocate in to say, what does this mean? What am I looking for to see that my child is actually making progress on this?
Right, right. And I don't know if you'd agree with this. Something that I fought heavily for and that I found very interesting over the years, and I really didn't identify with it probably till my son was about in fifth grade or so, is that the goals, always seem lofty. And though we want our kids to reach high, right? We want to see what the best potential is out of that goal for that next year out of them. I found them to be extremely inaccurate, and extremely like, okay, you're going to go from doing this one opportunity at a time. By the end of the year, you're going to do it 8 times, in that opportunity. And what I try to voice and advocate for in the schools is that, and I think parents should be cognizant of, is that if those goals, if that's the only thing you have, so a lot of times when we're looking at services for those with different abilities, the only thing a parent has is that IEP. Sometimes you don't have neuropsych evals. Sometimes your kiddo doesn't have medical impairment as well to add to that list. And so when those outside services and supports are only looking at the content in that IEP, if it is so lofty that when they're looking at those goals, they're like, oh, well, Jimmy is only this far behind on this, and he's only this far behind on this, and the accuracy is not there. That hinders the amount of services that one can get. And so I always try to bring that down, because I'm like, I understand we want to reach high, but we also want to be more accurate, more precise, and really giving him lofty things isn't going to help him service wise. So have you seen that before? And that's my question, is that, have you seen that before in IEPs where it's like, I don't even know where you came up with that goal? Like,
yes. And so I have a story. I had a kiddo who was 16 or 17. He was in a private school where he was only with other children with disabilities, but the home districts, the goal was that he would write a 5-paragraph essay by the end of the year. Then we're talking about transition, at a different point of the meeting, and they're like, well, he doesn't know the pieces to make a sentence. So I said, why do we have a goal that he's going to do an entire 5-paragraph essay when we're still working on sentence structure and things like that? And everybody just kind of looked, bewildered on the school side. And it's, of course, we want them to be able to write an essay. We want our kids to reach for the stars. But in terms of the goals, which are really working, like we talked about on fine-tuned academic pieces, you got to treat them like building blocks and make sure, like you said, that you're not trying to start building your tower at the top, Right. The other thing I'll tell you about precision is that you have to, a lot of times IEPs don't describe everything that's going on. So you have to imagine that you have to pick up your family and move across the state and hand this IEP to a new school, and they have to be able to give your child what they're getting at the current school. And if the IEP isn't accurate enough for them to do that, you have to add more. There's no page limit. There's no word limit. Put it all in there.
Right. And what you're saying with like that 5-page paragraph, and that's a great example, because can you imagine if you were asking for a supportive service, outside funding, anything, and you gave them an IEP that your third grader is going to write a 5-page paragraph, or fifth grader, you know what I'm saying, is going to do this, they'd be like, well, their need isn't very high.
Right.
But they're having them as goals and they can do. And so I've seen so many families over time hurt by that. But it takes the parents for you to stop, because, you know, a lot of times they've already typed up, you know, they have all these things typed up in the meeting and you're doing it and you're sitting there like, okay, well, every single goal is inaccurate. So, you know, that's when you end up having like a 3-hour IEP.
Well, and yeah, I mean, this can, you know, it takes time to go through these things. You can always, especially if they hand you a draft in the meeting for the first time and you haven't had a chance to read it, ask to come back. And I know it's hard to get off work and all those things, but this is a contract that you're signing that is valid for a year unless you change it. So,
Right.
you know, make sure you know what's in there.
Yeah. And like what you were saying is if you were moving to a different state, that's such a good point too, because you do, like I said, there's so many people. I mean, for my son, because he has medical issues, we have all these different, you know, analyses that have been done and studies and whatnot, but so many parents only have that IEP, and you need to know that that's all you have. That's what everybody's basing what they're giving you off of. And so you want to be as absolutely as accurate as possible. So that's a good point. Such a good point. All right. Number 3.
So number 3 is to share with teachers. So, and I know sometimes parents are like, I'm so busy, it's their job to read the IEP, you know, and I agree, it is, but it's so important. Do you want to, you know, hope that they took the time to read it, or do you want to set up a time to either meet with them or talk over the phone and just make sure they have a copy of the IEP, and, you know, add your own personal, well, just have a conversation about it. Having that back and forth is so important. And then again, the IEP might not explain in enough detail what a new teacher who's never met your child would need to, you know, understand what the day-to-day is going to look like. So that helps ensure a couple things. You know, one, it helps ensure that the, you know, the IEP has been read. So if there are problems with following it or implementing it, that they can't say, oh, sorry, I just didn't know that was in there, sorry. But I also think that it's just the best thing for your child to make that connection. So for example, I had a case where the child had Prader-Willi syndrome, and a teacher was using candy as rewards in class, and because they didn't understand the disability, they didn't understand what a huge deal it is to be giving this child candy a lot throughout. I mean, we're talking about rewards many, many times throughout the day. So again, just having that conversation can prevent some of these huge communication breakdowns that can lead to major problems down the road. And also, you know, going back to my earlier point, that's kind of your inroad to understand the goals and understand what they're working on. And it helps you get what you need to work on academics at home.
Right. Okay, and number 4?
So number 4 is just about communication and progress. So the IEP should detail with the goals how the parent is going to get information about the child's progress. Most often, like by default, that's going to be in progress reports, which you're going to get, you know, quarterly at the least, sometimes more than that. At the same time, any other kids get progress reports. However, you can ask for more frequent updates on how your child is doing on the goals. And then also communication between home and school can be written into the IEP as well. So for example, some children have daily behavior logs that are going back and forth. And it might not just be behavior, it might be about what they're eating or when they're using the bathroom. But just having that go back and forth, either a handwritten thing that is physically coming to and from school with your child, or there's so many online programs now like Infinite Campus, where you can communicate online or even via email, just sending those notes back and forth. And so some of the reasons these are important, like I mentioned before, you don't want to get to the end of the annual and realize your child has either not met the goal at all, or not met it completely enough to drop the goal off and add something new. You don't want to wait for the annual for that to happen. So make sure that the school is sending you those progress reports. And if they're not, ask for them, and maybe you need to ask for the IEP to clarify how you're going to find out how your child is doing.
Yes, and I encourage, I think every parent should have some kind of a logbook, that goes up and back on a regular basis, or a touch base once a week or something like that, just to really, stay up to date on how they're doing, because we know how fast time goes, right? And how many things happen every day. I always think like those progress reports, if they're every 3 months or whatever they are, it's a lot of information. A lot of things could transpire. And if you lose that communication, and frustrations start and you don't stomp things out earlier, I feel like that's sometimes how they escalate.
Oh, sure, absolutely. Well, and even something as simple, I have a case going on right now where the parent was asking for more stuff to come home so she could help. So they finally sent home the child's vocabulary words, that he had to know for the vocab test for the 10 questions. And he got 100% on it, and he had been failing them because mom worked, you're the expert on your child. And, we're not teachers. We're not, most of us, many of us are not teachers, but we are the experts on our children. And sometimes we know how to get through to them in a way somebody else doesn't. So, having, you don't know what you don't know. So having that information can really help your child succeed.
Yes. And your number 5.
So number 5, this is certainly not last in terms of importance. It was just last on my list here, is to know your rights. So every year you will get a copy of the procedural safeguards. It's like a big booklet, and it's got, all this legalese about what your rights are. And I'm sure that goes straight to the recycle bin for a lot of people, or it gets shoved into your, your big Pendaflex folder with all your IEP stuff. I would suggest at least read the headings, read the headlines, so you know what's in it. So not that you have to read every word of every detail, but just read the headlines. So for example, in Wisconsin's procedural safeguards book, there's a headline about an independent educational evaluation. A lot of parents don't know that you have the right to ask for an independent evaluation if you don't agree with the school's decision on, whether your child is eligible or what kind of services your child needs. So just having read over that, knowing that, hey, that's in there, I know where to look for it, is a good practice. I have to sneeze, I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay.
Okay.
All this wind here, now like allergy season. It went from fall in Wisconsin.
So a couple things from the procedural safeguards that I pulled out besides the independent educational evaluation are another big one is consent. So there are a lot of things that you need to give consent for. So for example, if you make a request, say your child already has an IEP, but you think there's another category they might be eligible for. So, hey, I think he might also be eligible under speech and language. You ask for that, but you still have to give your consent. And you not giving your consent can hold up the evaluation process and delay the running of that timeline. Another huge thing in there is prior written notice. So anytime the school is doing a major action, so like changing placement or changing services, like reducing speech or moving your child to a classroom, a less integrated or more integrated classroom for that matter, they have to give prior written notice. They also do that when they're refusing to do something that you have asked for. So if you say, hey, my doctor recommends a child have more OT, for example, here's a doctor's report, and they say, no, we're not going to do that. They're required to provide prior written notice, and if they don't, you can ask for it. So a couple highlights, out of the procedural safeguards. Also, it's important to have a general idea of timelines. So I know in Wisconsin, we have special education in plain language. It's a booklet. It's a really great resource. So that's got all the timelines in there, again, to just make sure things are staying on track. I know especially if your child has a specific learning disability and they're, going through the response to intervention process, you can be talking about extending your timelines. I've heard of kids where their evaluation had dragged on for 2 years. That's not acceptable. So holding the school to the timelines. And then finally, keeping track of evaluations. So after your initial, there are supposed to be evaluations every 3 years. And a lot of times, if everybody agrees, oh, of course, the child still needs an IEP, like still has a disability that meets, the requirements for special education, let's just skip the eval. Well, here's what the problem is. It's every 3 years. So all of a sudden you get 9 years from now and you have no new information. So, keep track of your evaluation timelines, and new information helps you make a good IEP. It's not that you are saying you think your child doesn't meet the criteria anymore. It's to get new data in that really in-depth evaluation process.
Right. Because that at the end of the day, I feel is what it's all about, because in so many aspects, when we talk about services, different supports, them getting more supportive services at school, it's all contingent to what this, all this compiled information is. And so the more we can put into those IEPs and the more good information you can get from outside sources. I always say, if your child does have anything medically, ask your doctor. You're not inconveniencing them. And even if you don't need it, put those doctor letters in there, because it's kind of like walking into a court case where you have all this evidence. I'm always like, we're our own little attorneys.
You really are. You are your own attorney. And if you walk into that meeting and say, well, so-and-so said this, or you feel that something is necessary for your child, but you are the only voice saying it, it just doesn't hold in as much weight as if you come in, guns blazing with your doctor's letter and your therapist's letter and your, all the support from the outside backing up your position.
Right. And that's where I say sometimes you have to take that mindset like an attorney would when you walk into something, because as parents, we all know what our kiddos need, but really it's just our word against what they're saying they see if we don't have that compiled information.
For sure.
For that. And Vicki, are you able, like if a parent would have an outside question, are they able to reach you via like email?
Yeah, absolutely. So on our website, which is davisandpledl.com, we've got our emails are on there, and there's a place that you can send an email, and I can drop my email in the comments as well.
Great. So if anybody has an outside question, maybe they're dealing with something, and obviously you're in the state of Wisconsin, but a lot of the content is relevant everywhere and kind of just helping to navigate somebody in the right direction is always awesome. And also on your, I know you have a Facebook too, and we can drop that below. But you do sometimes periodically during the year, you have different trainings, right, that come up, or classes, things like that.
Yes, we both do some in-person training. So the next one I have coming up is November 19th, and it is going to be about, I'm presenting about guardianship and decision-making options. So, powers of attorney and supported decision-making agreements, as well as guardianship. And I'm co-presenting with a special needs financial planner about different options for, financial options for planning for your child with special needs.
Yes, and I would encourage anyone that if you're in Wisconsin to make sure you get to those types of presentations, or if you're outside, to seek them, in your area, because the IEP process and all of this is relevant to the age of 21. After that, after 18, there's so many things that we need to think about as parents as we transition into guardianship and trust and planning and financing and all that other stuff like we've talked about before in the past. So it's great to stay on top of these things.
And like I mentioned, just knowing what's there. I mean, sometimes people are in our guardianship presentations that have, I don't know, a 12-year-old. So it's far down the road, but if you have the time, just go listen, so you know somewhere in the back of your mind to store it back there. This is something I'm going to have to do at some point, and help you get ready. And then it's never too early to do your special needs trust or your ABLE account, and some of the other planning. You can do that at any time.
Yeah, and I have really found myself, now that my son's 22, I mean, he's going to be 22 in another 2 months, but I have found that I think I should have started planning around 12 to 13 years old. Because I think we get so wrapped into the fact that we have IEPs and we go to school and we're able to advocate and we're able to get all these services and, fight our school, and legally they have to do these things. And so many don't realize that after you bridge out of that school system, whether that's at 18 or at 21, life is very different. And you need to be prepared. And it's going to take you more than a year or 2 or 3 to prepare. For all the things you have to prepare for. It's going to
because so many of the supports that are available in school are not. I mean, you just can't get them outside of the K-12 school system. So how are you going to replicate that? Well, or maybe they're available, but you need to piece it together through different funding systems and this and that. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It takes a lot of planning.
Yeah, and because everything falls upon under, when you're in schooling, it's all under that entitlement services, but then over the age of 21 is all eligibility. So after you bridge out of school, whether kids decide to leave at 18 or 21, it's all about being eligible. So it's like, if it's a program, you fit in the box, great, you can take advantage of that service. If you don't fit into their perimeters, they have the legal right to say, I'm sorry, this isn't a good match for our program. Where in school, for 18 or 21 years, they didn't have that option, right?
Right. Yeah.
To say that, like, oh, sorry, this isn't going to fit, we can't help you, it's
Right.
definitely something to get prepared for. But all of those things are awesome. All of your different points, I'm going to kind of get those listed out as well, but we'll drop all of the resources and your contact and all that stuff below.
Okay, sounds good.
Wow. Well, thank you, Vicki. Anything else you'd like to leave parents with today before we log off?
You have to read the IEP and be the expert on the IEP, and don't be afraid to ask for help to do that.
Okay, that is good. Yes, read it. I've heard that so many times. You have to read it. Big, not exciting, but we have to read it and follow through. So thank you so much, Vicki. I appreciate you being with us this early morning time. Thank you all your viewers for watching this morning. If you want to learn any more about the On Air Advocate, head on over to onairadvocate.com. If you want to become part of our private community, head up to the top of this Facebook page, hit the blue button, and that will let you into our private group. So on that note, everybody have a fabulous Friday and a great weekend. Thanks again, Vicki. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.